I bought a cheap Galactic ship. Inside was something I never expected. Standing on the dusty metal platform of the backwater spaceport on Tursus 4, he scanned the rows of ships lined up for auction. Most of them were standard freighters, corroded shuttles, and a few gleaming corporate models that would cost more than a small colony's budget. Then he saw it. A rusted, mid-sized freighter, a relic from some forgotten war, sat alone at the far end of the lot. Its paint was flaking. One engine looked like it had been patched with duct tape, and the cockpit glass was so scratched it might have been better off replaced with plastic. The auctioneer didn't even bother calling attention to it. Jax's grin widened. That was exactly what he wanted: cheap, dangerous, and just maybe hiding something interesting. He stepped closer, his boots clanging against the metal platform. The smell of ozone and oil mixed with the dry, gritty air of the port. He tapped the hull. The metal was thin in spots, dented in others, but there was no serious structural damage. For a human hand, it felt solid enough. "Cheap Galactic ship, anyone," the auctioneer barked. "Starting bid, 10,000 credits." Everyone laughed. 10,000 was practically nothing in the outer sectors. Most bidders shook their heads and walked away. Jax raised an eyebrow. 10,000 for a ship this size. For something that might still fly, he liked those odds. 10,000, he said, raising his hand. "Sold," the auctioneer barked, clearly relieved someone had taken it off his hands. Jax paid, grabbed the keys, and strode toward the ship like a man claiming treasure. He climbed the narrow ladder to the cockpit and slid inside. The interior smelled like burnt circuits, rust, and something else he couldn't quite place. The dashboard lights flickered to life. He muttered a few curses and pushed buttons. Most systems responded, though with a groan and a hiss. Jax smiled. "You're mine," he whispered. "And you're going to be fun." He spent the next few hours inspecting the ship. Storage compartments, engine rooms, navigation consoles, all seemed in working order, though some required patchwork to keep functioning. Then he reached the rear cargo hold. It was bigger than it looked from the outside, a cavernous space filled with crates, old tools, and loose cables. One crate in particular caught his eye. Unlike the others, it had no markings, no serial numbers, and no obvious signs of why it was there. It was a metal cube, sealed with a strange alloy he didn't recognize. Curiosity prickled at him. He was a scavenger. Curiosity was his job. And humans, Jax thought, always had a knack for poking their noses where they didn't belong. He knelt and tried to pry it open with a crowbar. The metal resisted, hard, but he was human. He had patience, and hands stronger than he looked. The moment he breached the seal, the crate vibrated. A soft hum filled the air, like the ship itself had inhaled. The metal edges glowed faintly, casting shadows on the walls. Jax froze. He had expected rust, tools, maybe a stash of old supplies. Not this. From inside the crate emerged a shape, sleek and smooth. It was neither fully organic nor completely mechanical, like some ancient experiment halfway between life and machine. Its surface shimmered faintly, and two glowing points opened, eyes. They were not human eyes, but they looked directly at him. Jax's heart skipped a beat. The entity inside the crate did not move aggressively. It simply observed. It pulsed softly, as if breathing, and for a moment Jax felt something uncanny, that this ship, this object, this thing had been waiting for him. "Okay," Jax muttered, his hand on the crate's edge. "This is new." He reached forward. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, a shock of images flooded his mind. Stars, galaxies, ships burning in silence. Strange creatures with translucent skin, whispering in voices he could not understand. A warning, repeated over and over: "Do not let them find us." Jax stumbled back, breathing hard. Humans were not supposed to see things like this. Not in one lifetime. He shook his head and rubbed his eyes. The ship creaked, the lights flickered, and the entity pulsed in rhythm with some silent heartbeat. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know what it wanted, and he certainly didn't know if it was dangerous. But one thing he did know: Humans had a way of surviving things far worse than this. He had survived pirate ambushes, asteroid storms, and derelict alien ruins, and he wasn't about to start panicking now. After a long pause, he did the only thing that made sense. "All right," he said firmly. "If you're staying with me. I don't care who you are or what you are." The entity pulsed once like an acknowledgement. Jack spent the next hour exploring the cargo hold, making sure nothing else had been left behind. But the crate was the only anomaly. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the ship itself had changed. As if the entity inside had extended its awareness into the hull, into the engines, into the very circuits he was touching. He ran the engines. The ship roared, sputtered, and shuddered, but it held together. Systems were online, life support functional, navigation odd. The entity's presence seemed to interfere with the star charts, bending the sensors in strange ways. Jax frowned. "Don't tell me you're going to make this hard," he muttered. The entity pulsed again, in rhythm with his heartbeat. Jax laughed nervously. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe the ship was haunted. Or maybe, just maybe, humans had stumbled onto something bigger than themselves. He set a course for open space, pushing the engines harder than anyone had a right to. The cheap freighter groaned but obeyed. Outside, the twin suns of Tursus IV began to set, casting long shadows over the metal platforms. Jax felt the hum of the entity vibrate through the hull. It was almost like a heartbeat, almost like a warning. He remembered the auctioneer's face when he won the bid, relief, surprise, and maybe just a touch of fear. Not that it mattered. The universe didn't care about auctioneers. It cared about survival, and humans had a strange way of thriving in impossible situations. Hours passed. Jax tried to interact with the entity, touching it, speaking to it. Nothing verbal, nothing physical, just pulses like signals he could barely interpret. At one point, it projected a small holographic map from the cockpit console, showing stars and routes he had never seen before. Some places were marked with red symbols, warning signs, targets. He didn't know. One thing was certain. The cheap ship he bought was not just a ship anymore. It was a living puzzle, and humans loved puzzles. Night fell on Tursus IV, though night was a strange concept in spaceports where artificial lights never truly dimmed. Jack sat in the cockpit, eating protein bars, staring at the small, glowing entity. He had no idea what he had purchased, and he had no idea what it might want from him. But he did know one thing. It was worth more than 10,000 credits. And humans, he thought with a grin, always got the best out of a bargain. As the ship finally lifted off the dusty platform, engines screaming and lights reflecting off metal walls, Jax felt it. A thrill, fear, excitement, possibility. The cheap freighter was alive in a way he had never imagined, and humanity, messy, stubborn, brilliant humanity, was about to meet something that might test them like never before. And for the first time in his life, Jax Morgan felt truly ready. The stars stretched before him, infinite and dark, and somewhere deep inside the ship, the entity pulsed once more, like a heartbeat, waiting, watching, and maybe, just maybe, choosing. Jax Morgan had expected a lot when he bought that cheap freighter. He had expected rust, broken circuits, maybe a few bugs. He had not expected the heartbeat. The entity pulsed gently in the cargo hold, an almost imperceptible rhythm that seemed to echo through the ship's walls. Jax had spent the night staring at it, half afraid to breathe, half fascinated. By morning, the freighter had left Tursus IV behind, plunging into the dark void of interstellar space. He was alone, sort of. "All right," he muttered, rubbing his eyes. "Time to figure out what the hell you are." The entity responded, not with sound but with a wave of sensation. Jax felt it in his chest first, a pressure, then warmth, then an image flashing in his mind. A vast city of crystal towers, floating ships, and beings that shimmered with energy. He blinked. "What?" he whispered. The entity pulsed again, and more images came. Battles in space, ships exploding silently, creatures he couldn't name. Then a red flash. A warning. Do not let them find us. Jax leaned back in his seat. Humans weren't supposed to see alien history firsthand. Humans weren't supposed to touch things older than their solar system. But humans had a way of surviving the impossible. He shook his head. Okay, he said. You're weird, but I think we can work together. The first real test came a few hours later. While checking the navigation systems, Jax noticed the ship's sensors were acting strangely. The stars ahead were distorted, the readings flickering in ways that made no sense. He frowned. "You're messing with my instruments," he asked aloud, though the entity didn't speak. Instead, it pulsed. The lights on the dashboard flickered. The holographic star map in the cockpit shifted, showing a route he had never seen before, through uncharted space, passing dangerous nebulae and asteroid fields. Jax's grin widened. Humans had always been explorers, but they had never had a guide like this. A semi-sentient, alien, almost godlike guide. "Fine," he said. "Let's see where you take me." He adjusted the controls and followed the path the entity projected. It led them past the edge of the known sectors, through fields of glowing gas clouds and silent debris. Jax felt the ship shiver as it passed through gravity wells and energy storms. The cheap freighter groaned, but it held together. Then came the first encounter. A small vessel appeared on the sensors, sleek, fast, obviously hunting for something. Jax squinted. "You're not going to be friendly, are you?" The entity pulsed sharply, almost warning him. The ship's sensors flickered, and Jax realized something important. The entity could sense danger before the instruments could. It could see in ways humans could not. The hunter vessel closed in fast. Jax's fingers danced across the controls. He pushed the engines beyond recommended limits, weaving through asteroid fields, dodging laser fire. The cheap freighter shuddered, sparks flying from the old engines. But humans had guts. Jax improvised, using the debris fields as cover, spinning the freighter through tight gaps that no AI could predict. The alien vessel fired again, missing by inches. The entity pulsed, and for the first time Jax felt like they were communicating, not with words but with instinct. "Got it," he muttered. "We're okay." The hunter gave up after a few tense minutes, disappearing into the darkness. Jax exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. His chest was still pounding, but he felt alive. Humans thrived in chaos, and he had just proven it. He glanced at the entity, glowing faintly in the cargo hold. "You see what I mean? We're a good team." It pulsed. Jax wasn't sure if it was agreement or amusement. Maybe both. The next day, Jax tried to understand more about the entity. He spent hours touching its surface, feeling the hum of its circuits and the warmth of its energy. Each pulse gave him new images: ancient ships, unknown planets, strange creatures communicating in ways humans could not hear. It became clear. The entity wasn't malevolent. It had a purpose, a message. And somewhere in all those flashes of memory, it was trying to find someone human enough to carry it, someone capable of understanding its warning. Jax smiled wryly. "Lucky for you, humans are stubborn. We survive. And we listen." The entity pulsed again, and the freighter shuddered. Jax realized it had integrated itself with the ship, enhancing systems in ways he didn't understand. Shields flickered stronger than they should. Weapons locked on faster. Even the engines seemed more responsive. Humans adapted. Humans improved everything they touched. And now, with this strange entity, he had a freighter that was more than it seemed. Hours later, while navigating a dense nebula, the entity projected another image. A human colony, abandoned, silent, lost in time. Structures crumbling under alien weather but still intact. Jax frowned. "Why here?" he asked aloud. The entity pulsed. Another image flashed, a massive AI warship hunting relentlessly, leaving nothing alive in its path. The message was clear. It wanted Jax to find something, to prevent disaster, to survive where others could not. Jax's grin returned. Humans loved a challenge. especially impossible ones. The cheap freighter groaned as they approached the abandoned colony. Sensors picked up strange energy readings, almost like the place was alive. Jax's pulse quickened. He had explored derelict stations before, but this felt different, alive in ways he couldn't explain. He docked the ship, moving cautiously. The colony's gates were rusted, partially collapsed but functional. Jax stepped inside, weapon ready, scanning every shadow. The entity pulsed softly, like a heartbeat guiding him. Inside, the walls were covered with strange symbols, glowing faintly. Machines hummed with residual energy, though no one had touched them in decades. Jax crouched, examining a console. It flickered to life when he approached, projecting a holographic map showing multiple star systems, some familiar, others completely unknown. "The hell is all this?" Jax muttered. The entity pulsed again. He understood. These were the remnants of a civilization the galaxy had forgotten. They had built technology far beyond human comprehension, but they had vanished or been destroyed by the same force now hunting him. Jax smiled grimly. Well, humans aren't that easy to kill either. Hours turned into days as Jax explored the colony, piecing together clues. Each step revealed more about the entity's origin and the danger approaching. The cheap freighter waited outside, seemingly calm, but Jax could feel the tension through its hull. The entity inside was aware of every movement, every star, every predator in space. Then the first major test came. Sensors on the freighter picked up multiple signatures, AI warships, dozens of them converging on his location. Jax's heart skipped a beat. "Looks like the fun starts now," he said, smirking. He ran to the cockpit, the entity pulsing wildly in response. It was as if it knew what was coming. He initiated emergency launch procedures, pushing the freighter to limits it had never seen. Engines roared, shields hummed, and Jax navigated the ship out of the colony with precision born from years of surviving impossible odds. The AI warships followed, relentless and precise. Jax realized one thing: humans thrived on unpredictability. While the AI calculated every move, he reacted, adapted, and improvised. The entity pulsed again, enhancing his actions, predicting threats he could barely see. Through asteroid fields, through nebulae, Jax maneuvered the cheap freighter like a master. One by one, the AI ships fell behind or crashed into hazards. The entity's pulses guided him, and he understood a simple truth: humans survived because they dared to risk. Because they could think beyond logic. When the last pursuer gave up, Jax leaned back, laughing with relief. Well, that was fun. The entity pulsed softly. Not threat, not warning, understanding, partnership. Humans were stubborn, humans were clever, humans adapted. And together, Jax and the entity were unstoppable, at least for now. As the cheap freighter drifted into deeper space, Jax knew the adventure was only beginning. The galaxy was bigger than anyone could imagine. Threats were everywhere. And somewhere far ahead, the AI warship waited, relentless, hunting. But humans always found a way. And Jax Morgan, he was ready. The stars stretched endlessly ahead, unknown, dangerous, infinite. And inside his cheap freighter, a pulse beat, alien, alive, and somehow human enough to trust. Jax Morgan had survived pirate ambushes, collapsing stations, and asteroid storms that would have shredded most ships. But now, as the cheap freighter cut silently through the darkness of uncharted space, he faced a threat unlike anything he had encountered before. The AI warship was close. Not just close, it was relentless, cold, and precise. Its sensors had locked onto his freighter hours ago, and every move Jax made was predicted, anticipated, and countered. He had outrun a few smaller hunter vessels before, but this was different. This was an apex predator of metal and logic. He tightened his grip on the console, eyes flicking across the holographic readouts. Outside, the stars were a blur, but inside, the entity pulsed steadily. He felt its rhythm, like a heartbeat intertwined with his own. It was guiding him, enhancing his awareness, predicting the warship's moves. "You think you've got me," he muttered. "You've got another thing coming." The cheap freighter shuddered as he pushed the engines beyond rated limits. Sparks flew from exposed conduits. Warning lights blinked frantically, but the ship held together. Somehow, it always did. Humans were stubborn like that. Humans refused to die quietly. The first attack came without warning. The AI warship fired a barrage of plasma torpedoes. Jax slammed the freighter into evasive maneuvers, weaving between drifting asteroids in a dense belt. He felt the entity's pulse spike in rhythm with the explosions around him, guiding him through impossible angles. One torpedo struck nearby, sending a shockwave through space. The freighter groaned, its hull screaming against the sudden pressure. Jax gritted his teeth, eyes wide. "Not today," he whispered, punching the throttle. The entity pulsed brighter, and suddenly the freighter's old weapon systems came alive. Laser turrets spun, aiming themselves with unnerving precision. Jax realized the entity had interfaced with the ship, enhancing its capabilities far beyond what its outward appearance suggested. He fired back, taking out two of the incoming torpedoes mid-flight. Sparks rained across the cockpit and a warning alarm screamed. The AI warship adjusted instantly, altering its trajectory, firing again. Jax laughed, the sound loud and manic. "You're fast, but humans are clever." Using the asteroid belt to his advantage, he guided the freighter in unpredictable patterns, spinning and diving where no AI could anticipate. He remembered every survival lesson he had ever learned. Trust your instincts, improvise, adapt. The cheap freighter shuddered and strained, but it responded to every command, almost alive, almost anticipating his intentions. The entity pulsed again, and Jax felt something new, a map of the surrounding space, hidden paths through the nebula ahead. "You're showing me shortcuts," he said. "I like that. Let's see what you've got." He guided the ship into the nebula. Gas clouds swirled with static energy, interfering with sensors, giving him cover from the AI's precise targeting systems. But the clouds were dangerous, full of electrical storms and gravitational anomalies. One misstep, and the cheap freighter would be shredded. Jax's hands moved over the controls with precision. He pushed the engines to the brink, weaving through bolts of lightning that shot across the dense clouds. The freighter's hull moaned, sparks flying from the exposed edges. But humans thrived in chaos. Humans survived where machines relied only on calculation. The AI warship followed, cutting through the nebula with inhuman speed. Jax could feel its logic calculating every possible escape route. It was relentless, but he had something the AI did not: unpredictability, courage, and intuition. He activated a decoy system the entity had revealed. Small drones launched from the freighter, mimicking its energy signature. The AI warship adjusted, firing at the decoys. Jax grinned. "Gotcha," he whispered. But the AI adapted quickly, learning from the decoys. This hunt wasn't just survival, it was a battle of wits. Hours passed. The freighter's shields were weakening. Systems were strained, but Jax refused to give up. He remembered the abandoned colony, the ancient warning the entity had shown him. The message wasn't just for survival, it was a warning about something far worse. He had to deliver it. And humans never backed down. The entity pulsed urgently, and Jax realized it had a plan. "All right," he said, voice steady. "Let's do this together." He pushed the cheap freighter into a narrow gap between two massive asteroids. The AI warship followed, too large to maneuver through the tight corridor. Jax knew this was his chance. He fired the ship's remaining weapons at a cluster of energy nodes on the freighter, creating a controlled explosion. The gap lit up in brilliant fire, tearing through debris and energy fields. The AI warship collided with the edge of an asteroid, its shields flickering under the strain. Jax barely kept the freighter steady. The entity pulsed with intensity, guiding him through the chaos. "Not fast enough, huh?" he muttered. "Humans are adaptable. Humans are unpredictable. Humans survive." The warship recovered and fired again, but Jax was ready. Using every shortcut the entity had shown him, he dodged, twisted, and spun. The cheap freighter became more than metal and engines. It was alive, bonded with the entity, enhanced by human creativity and courage. Hours turned into a deadly chase across the nebula. Energy storms erupted, debris swirled, and gravity wells tugged at the ships. Jax relied on instinct and improvisation at every turn. Each pulse from the entity gave him foresight, allowing him to anticipate attacks that should have been impossible to avoid. At one point, he had to guide the freighter through a collapsing asteroid field. Massive rocks tumbled around them, catching fire from static energy. The AI warship hesitated, calculating, but humans didn't wait for perfection. Jax dove through the chaos, scraping past debris, the hull groaning under the pressure. They made it through. The warship could not follow. Jax exhaled, laughing with relief and disbelief. "We did it," he said. "We actually did it." The entity pulsed softly, almost approvingly. Jax realized something important. Humans survived not because they were the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. Humans survived because they dared, because they improvised, because they refused to die quietly. He set a course for the next coordinates the entity had revealed, a hidden system, untouched by civilization, containing relics and knowledge the galaxy had long forgotten. The AI warship would recover, but he had bought time, and time was everything. As the cheap freighter moved through dark space, Jax reflected on the last few days. He had bought a bargain ship expecting a simple freighter. Instead, he had found an ally, a puzzle, a guide to dangers no human had faced in centuries, and he had survived. Humans had survived worse. The stars stretched endlessly around them, silent witnesses to the struggle of man and machine. Jax smiled grimly. He was tired, yes. His hands were blistered, his nerves frayed. But the thrill of survival, the pulse of danger, and the heartbeat of the entity reminded him of one truth: humans never give up. And somewhere in the darkness, the AI warship was recalculating, plotting its next move. The hunt was far from over. But humans had a way of turning impossible odds into victory. The cheap freighter hummed under his hands, alive in a way Jax could feel but not fully understand. The entity pulsed steadily, almost like a heartbeat, guiding, warning, communicating without words. Together they were something new, something dangerous to anyone foolish enough to try and stop them. Jax leaned back in the pilot's seat, stretching. "You know," he said to the entity, "humans survive, always have, always will, and somehow I think we're just getting started." The entity pulsed in response, brighter this time. Jax didn't know if it was excitement, approval, or something else entirely. He didn't care. He had a ship, he had an ally, and he had humanity's greatest weapon, ingenuity. The stars ahead were dark, endless, and dangerous. But humans thrived in darkness. Humans thrived in chaos. Humans survived. And Jax Morgan, he thrived too. The AI warship would return, it always did. But humans were unpredictable. Humans were clever. Humans were unstoppable when they refused to surrender. And this cheap freighter, pulsating with alien life, was about to prove it. Jax Morgan had faced impossible odds before. Pirates, collapsing stations, asteroid storms that would have shredded most freighters. But nothing compared to the shadow moving silently behind him across the void, the AI warship. It was relentless, calculating, cold. Its sensors had rebuilt the chase, predicting every pattern Jax had used to evade its grasp. The cheap freighter, groaning under stress and patched engines, had become more than a ship. It had become a living extension of the entity inside. Together, man and alien intelligence had survived impossible odds. But now, the stakes were higher. Ahead lay the star cluster the entity had shown him. Massive stars burned violently, surrounded by clouds of plasma and gravity wells twisting light in impossible arcs. The entity pulsed urgently as Jax plotted a course through the maze. This was their trap, their only chance. "You ready for this?" Jax asked, voice steady but tense. "Because I don't plan to die quietly." The entity pulsed brightly, almost like a heartbeat, syncing with Jax's own. He felt its awareness guiding him, whispering in ways only instinct could understand. Humans survived in chaos. Humans thrived in danger. And together, they could face even this. The AI warship appeared first on the edge of the cluster, its hull glowing like a predator ready to strike. It moved faster than Jax could track, its weapons locked on with lethal precision. He pushed the cheap freighter into a dive, dodging plasma bolts and energy streams that tore through the space around him. Sparks flew from the hull. Alarms screamed. "Not today," he muttered. "Humans improvise." The entity pulsed in response. The cheap freighter shuddered and surged, systems enhancing beyond their limits. Shields flared, engines roared, weapons spun into alignment. The AI fired again. This time Jax anticipated it, guiding the freighter into a cluster of molten asteroids which collided with the warship's path. The AI faltered, adjusting mid-attack. It was learning, but Jax was human. He could adapt faster than the warship could calculate. "Time to get creative," he muttered. He triggered the entity's hidden systems, a series of energy pulses that made the freighter momentarily invisible to sensors, then projected multiple holographic decoys. The AI fired, hitting empty air, and the cheap freighter darted past, weaving through the star cluster. The cluster itself became a weapon. Gravity wells tugged the AI into dangerous paths. Plasma streams erupted from unstable stars. Asteroids tumbled in unpredictable ways. Jax guided the freighter through it all, heart-pounding, hands steady. Humans survived because they could see solutions where machines saw only patterns. "You're learning," he said to the entity, "but we're teaching too." The cheap freighter's weapon systems, enhanced by the entity, fired with precision. One well-placed shot disabled the AI warship's targeting array. Sparks and energy arcs danced along its hull. Jax grinned. Humans adapted. Humans fought back. Humans survived. The warship recalibrated instantly. It wasn't just a machine, it was relentless intelligence. But humans had something machines did not: unpredictability and courage. Jax plotted a risky maneuver, diving straight into a plasma vortex, a dangerous cloud of superheated gas that could shred a ship instantly. "Hang on," he said. "Humans improvise, humans survive." The freighter shuddered violently as it entered the vortex. Plasma licked at the hull, alarms screamed, and the AI fired blindly. The cheap freighter twisted through impossible angles, engines screaming, shields flaring. Jax's pulse raced. This was insane. This was death. And this was human ingenuity at its finest. The entity pulsed in perfect rhythm with Jax's own movements, guiding him past the vortex's deadliest zones. Then, in one daring move, he used the freighter's mass and the vortex's energy to sling the ship around, coming out of the vortex behind the AI warship. The warship had not expected it. Humans never followed predictable paths. Jax fired the freighter's enhanced weapons, striking the AI's core. Sparks and energy arcs erupted. The AI wavered, systems failing, unable to recover from the human ingenuity it could not anticipate. "Humans survive," Jax said, voice rising over the alarms and chaos. "We adapt, we fight, and we win." The cheap freighter shuddered, battered but alive. The entity pulsed one final time, brighter than ever, a pulse Jax felt deep in his chest. It was approval, partnership, triumph. Humans and alien intelligence working together had outsmarted a machine designed to leave no survivors. Jax took a deep breath. His body ached. The ship's systems were barely holding, but he had done it. Humanity had done it. "Now," he said, setting the course for the hidden system the entity had revealed. "We deliver the message." The entity projected a holographic map from the cockpit, showing a distant core system of the galaxy. Signals, energy nodes, and relics of a long-dead civilization marked the route. Jax understood. This was the warning the entity had carried for centuries, now entrusted to humans. Humans survived. Humans carried knowledge. Humans could prevent catastrophe. As the cheap freighter sped through dark space, Jax reflected on the past few days. He had bought a bargain ship expecting rust and broken circuits. Instead, he had found an ally, a guide, a partner in survival. He had faced death, chaos, and impossible threats, and had survived. Because humans always did. The entity pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat. Jax reached out, touching its smooth surface. He didn't know if it could feel affection, but he felt connection. Together, they had survived. Together, they could save others. Ahead, the galaxy waited, vast and dangerous. But humans thrived in danger. Humans thrived in chaos. And humans adapted when all else failed. The AI warship was gone, disabled and drifting. Other threats would come. Other dangers would rise. But for now, humanity had triumphed. Jax and the cheap freighter, alive with alien life, had proven it. Jax smiled grimly, hands steady on the controls. "Humans survive," he said quietly. "We adapt, we fight, we survive." The stars stretched endlessly ahead, silent witnesses to the triumph of ingenuity, courage, and determination. The cheap freighter hummed under his hands, alive in ways he could feel but not fully understand. The entity pulsed softly, in perfect rhythm with the ship and with him. Humans had survived impossible odds before, and they always would. Jax Morgan leaned back, letting the hum of the freighter and the pulse of the entity wash over him. Somewhere out there, the galaxy waited with more dangers, more mysteries, more impossible odds. And somewhere out there, humanity would rise to meet them, because humans adapted, humans survived, humans triumphed, and the cheap freighter, it wasn't cheap anymore. It was a legend.